Bill Hawkins. Come on in.
See you again, Brian.
Have a seat. So I just wanted to call your attention to one quick thing. We were entrepreneurs ourselves, Brad and I. We started our company in 2008 and lived the dream through 2009, 2010. And last year, we partnered with WTWH Media to fulfill sort of the entrepreneur dream and sell your company, so it's really exciting. But what we've launched together is what I hope you'll find as the Bible of medical device engineering and design. We're going to build this thing into something special. This is medical design and outsourcing. Please grab a copy on your way out. And this is our leadership issue about women in med tech. So we walk the walk and we talk the talk on entrepreneurship. God, this is awkward right here. So, as I said earlier, you're very far away. Why don't you come a little closer?
I was going to lay down, actually. This is close to my bedtime.
Well, we're gonna get deep into the psyche, so why not? Like I said, in 2010, we were a fledgling publication. We launched in 2009, and one of the things we said how we're going to make our mark is we're going to, I'm going to call the executive office of the biggest companies I can find. I'm just going to try and get the CEOs to talk to us, and we kind of put Medtronic and Boston Scientific up there on the bullseye and said we got to get these guys on the record. Boston Scientific basically never answered our call, but Bill Hawkins at Medtronic, turns out he was reading us, which when we knew that a man like Bill, who was CEO of Medtronic, was reading our stuff, we knew we were doing something right. And Bill gave us the opportunity to interview him one-on-one back then in the fall of 2010, and I really look at that as a pivotal moment for us. So I thank you very much. And that's when we were coming down south, I said, we got to get Bill because, he's a North Carolina guy. This is it. I really want to get a chance to talk to him again. So thank you so much. And I know.
Good to be back.
I knew you went to school here, but I didn't know how much this area was home to you. Your father, he was the mayor of Durham for 4 years?
Go figure.
So your dad was in politics.
That's why I'm in medicine.
What did your dad's experience in politics teach you about leadership?
Well, I always admired his ability to connect with people in all sort of walks of life. As a mayor, he had a diverse population, and it was his responsibility to kind of set the tone. And I used to kind of marvel at how he would, give talks and connect with people sort of on a one-on-one basis. And so, he taught me really just to be yourself, to be a good person and recognize that, we all, have something to contribute.
What led him into politics? Was it?
That's a good question. He'd always had a sort of a calling to really give back to the community. He had a small real estate business, but he got involved in the city council, became sort of head of the Chamber of Commerce. He ended up, when he was mayor, got involved with Lizzo Hodges and helped really bring about the Research Triangle Park. He ended up serving on the Raleigh-Durham Airport Authority, and so he loved this area. He loved Durham, and he loved North Carolina, and he felt that it was a privilege to be able to be a good kind of public servant.
How many terms is that? 4 years? Was that 1 or 2?
No, it was just 1 year.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. That was enough.
Yeah. You ran into a buzzsaw in that re-election, or did he just decide that was done?
I think he actually had hoped to be reelected, but it didn't work out,
right.
And but he didn't stop. That was a thing that, I think about even when I parallel my career at Medtronic when I stepped down. I was in no way ready to retire, and he was no way ready to kind of stop being a good citizen.
Yeah. I also read that you asked your parents to send you to boarding school to get away from your twin brother.
That would be true. That would be true.
That's kind of rare.
Yeah.
Why'd you do that?
Well, because so I grew up in Durham and was one of 5. There was 2 sets of twins. I have an identical twin brother. I have a younger brother who was 2 years younger, and I had sisters who were a year younger, so there was 5 of us in 3 years. And we lived in a very small house. And, and my twin brother and I we were very much identical.
Yeah.
And to the point that people would call me Bick and him Dill, because he was Dick and I was Bill. But they didn't know who was who, so they would just take a shot at it. And so it kind of started to create a little bit of identity conflict. I didn't know who I was. So I figured the only way to really get to know who I was to get out of Durham.
Yeah.
And I was fortunate that my parents could afford to send me away to a boarding school, and they did. And I went to a military school. I went to a place called Macaulay in Chattanooga, Tennessee, which is probably only famous because that's where Ted Turner went before he flunked out. Or kicked out, actually, I should say.
I find that's pretty rare, though. I mean, you find identical twins want to be together. I mean, is this? Do you have an individual streak about you that?
I don't know. I mean, I'm very, very close to my twin brother, and I think distance makes the heart grow fonder.
Yeah. So I also read. It's all in the same article, actually. It was fantastic.
I want to find out what you read and where you read it.
It was the New York Times. It was in your own
Oh,
words,
yeah.
actually.
Oh, is that right? I remember that.
I read in that you really wanted to attend the Darden School of Business for your MBA, and you wanted to do it. You wanted to get it, and you didn't get in, but you wanted to get in so badly that you called the director of admissions on the phone to tell him you made a mistake, but they didn't admit you.
That's true. That's a true story. So after I graduated from Duke, I ended up going to work for a small medical device firm. Great experience. We'll come back to that. But then decided that after being a salesperson for 3 years in the field, I didn't want to necessarily continue my career as a salesperson. And having worked for a very small medical device company, I got sort of the experience of working with people in finance and the president and all that, but I had concerns about how the company was being run, so I decided, you know what, probably if there's a good way for me to really kind of learn a lot about general management is if I can get into a good school. And at that point, Harvard, was a reputation for the case management program. Darden, University of Virginia, was the other program. And I really like Charlottesville, so I applied to Duke, to Carolina, and to UVA. And you're right, I sent in my application, and by full admission, I have never really done that well on the large standardized test, and I knew that was going to be an issue. Mm-hmm. And sure enough, I get this nice letter telling me that I was not being admitted. So I said, you know what, I'm not going to just let that go. Yeah. So I called the director of admissions, and I politely told the lady, I said, I think you've made a mistake. I think I got the wrong letter. And I said, I'd like to come down and tell you why I think you made a mistake. And I guess given the fact that I had the courage to do that, she said, well, we won't turn you away if you come down and you can talk to us. So I did, and lo and behold, they got the letter right. So, but it's a good lesson because I've always sort of told people throughout my career that it's the analogy is when the door is closed, you got to find the window, and you never give up.
Yeah. I'm curious. Anyone ever done that to you?
Yeah, there are people that have. That I know have wanted to work with me, and There was a guy that I hired when I was at Medtronic, when I was running the vascular division of Medtronic. There was this fellow, and never will forget this, guy named Pat Mackin, who is ultimately became the head of the cardiac rhythm business for Medtronic and recently left to run a public company called CryoLife. But he came out, I actually, when I first joined Medtronic, I was living in Atlanta, and I was then moved the family to Minneapolis, and then I commuted to Santa Rosa. You know, go figure that.
Wow.
So, but I remember I was out in Santa Rosa, California, and there was this fellow, Pat Mackin, who was brought to me as a candidate to run the AAA business. And he showed up in California. I was supposed to meet with him like at 8 o'clock on a Monday morning. And the guy, at 7:59, he comes, to my office, just dripping with sweat. And if you knew where the offices were in Santa Rosa, it's in the wine country. It's beautiful, actually. And we were up on this hill, and the hotel that we were staying was like 1.5 miles down to the bottom of the valley, and his car didn't show up. And he was destined to get there on time. And he went to West Point as an undergrad and a very fit guy. So he said, to hell with it, and he just ran up this hill. And he comes into my office, and actually he was, on paper, he wasn't kind of qualified.
Yeah.
And I sadly told him, I said, Pat, I think this is probably not going to work out. Well, he chased me down when I was back in Atlanta and told me he wanted to have breakfast at the OK Cafe, and we did. And anyway, I let him in. I didn't let him, but I offered him the job, and he's been one of the best general managers I've ever worked with.
That's great. And good. So go through the window, right?
Absolutely.
Should you ever try the window first rather than the door?
Well, that's, I don't know if I have, but I'm sure people have. And it doesn't always work.
So, correct me if I'm wrong on the dates here, but I did check. Your tenure as CEO of Medtronic was 2007 to 2010?
2011.
2011, okay. So let's look at that record. In your first year, you had to pull the trigger on a massive recall of the Sprint Fidelis leads. That was probably, your first decision?
Yep, that was, I was made CEO in August of 2007, and in late October, I was faced with one of the toughest decisions I've ever had to make, and that was whether or not...
Hold on, we'll get there.
Okay, okay.
Because this is a pattern. Second year, you're there, the global financial system melts down.
Yes,
and then in
right.
your third year, Congress passes the Affordable Care Act and
so
ushers in the device tax.
Yeah.
First, you look back at that time. Do you ever just pour yourself a drink, or want to pour yourself a drink when you look at that time? And second, each of these pivotal moments, I really want to know what you learned during them.
Well, first of all, it is what it is, and some of us get lucky and some of us don't. And my timing was not great, but in retrospect, those experiences really are experiences that I think really kind of help define who you are and define your leadership. And even though it was a very tough time, not just for me and Medtronic, but for the whole industry, and some cases you get a little bit sort of painted color of what's happening in the industry. But let me talk about what the lessons learned, because the decision that I ultimately had to make with regard to the Fidelis lead was one of the toughest decisions. I say tough. It was one of the most untimely decisions. You got to understand. So, here it was in August of 2007. A guy that grew up in Durham, North Carolina, and started off as a sales rep for Carolina Medical, whoever the hell they are. Then goes to business school, and then goes on this long journey of working with Eli Lilly and working with Johnson, working with Novo. Then, I finally ended up at Medtronic as a head of their vascular business, and lo and behold, I'm ultimately tapped to be the CEO of the world's largest medical device company. And I mean, it was just such an honor and such a privilege to be able to now be at the top of such a great company. And when I took over in 2007, the company actually, it was an interesting period. For those of you who knew the company, back in the late 90s and the early 2000s, when the financial sort of bubble, not the financial bubble, but we had when the whole markets were just at an all-time high. And at that point, you could do these sort of financial transactions called pooling of interest. And so you could do these mergers with almost monopoly money. And so Medtronic, ended up buying a number of large companies and, quadrupled its size. And I came in right after that, and so the period that I was there until I became the CEO, we didn't do any transactions. We were doing basically integrating all the businesses that we had bought. And unfortunately, we really hadn't done a lot to fill the cupboards with new technologies or new innovation. So I came in at a pretty interesting period. But anyway, here I am. I've just been given this great privilege of running this company. I went out to talk to the Wall Street sort of buy-side analyst with my CFO, and to my gratification, the stock market reacted very positively. The stock was going up, and I think there was a lot of excitement about maybe a new leadership style coming in. And then I come back after being on the road for about a month, and the gentleman that I mentioned to you, Pat Mackin, who is now running my cardiac rhythm business, he came to see me and said that, Bill, we've got a problem. We have these reports that our largest product in all Medtronic, the implantable defibrillator, these leads that are used to basically connect to the generator that goes into the heart to stimulate the heart. He said we got reports that was an unusually high failure rate in a certain center. And so, now, the reality is, for all of you who may know about pacemakers and defibrillators, is that, these leads, are not safe. They will work, 99.9999% of the time, so you don't have to worry. But in some cases, they can fracture. And, and that you have to replace them, and it's a very difficult, but it's a doable operation. But I got this word that this lead we had an unusually high failure rate. And so we made the decision to go out and interrogate all of the centers that were putting in defibrillators, because we had the capabilities of doing that, and we found, in fact, that this lead was actually had a higher than our other devices' failure rate. But compared to the competition, it was actually at about the same level, if not better. And so we were all, really trying so all of this was kind of coming together as we were collecting this information. And I remember it was about the same time that we have what we call the Global Heroes program. And one of the things that Medtronic did in Minneapolis is that we sponsored the marathon, and as a part of the marathon, we invited people who had Medtronic devices to come to Minneapolis, and we honored them in terms of running in the race with their devices. And I remember I was sitting at the luncheon that we had for the Global Heroes, and I was sitting next to this young woman from Boston. And she was, telling me, I said, well, you're here to run in the race. What device do you have? And she said, well, I have an implantable defibrillator. I have a genetic disorder where I'm at risk for a sudden cardiac death. And I said, well, I trust everything has gone well. And she said, unfortunately, I had a lead fracture. And we had, the good news is that they were able to replace it, but it was a pretty difficult operation. And my heart just sunk, because after having been aware that we were having this, this issue, and then to have someone personalize it in front of me. And so so about a week later or so, we convened a big sort of internal group of customers and a lot of different people, and ultimately it became clear to me that we needed to do a recall. Now, doing a recall for an implantable defibrillator lead is probably one of the most severe things you could ever do, because think about all the people who have a defibrillator, if they now know that you're doing a recall. Now, when you do a recall, you don't go in and take everybody's device out. You essentially just put them on notice, and then we developed an a software fix to be able to monitor it. But it was the toughest. And it was interesting because at the same time that this was happening, one of our competitors actually had an issue with their leads, and they did not report this problem, and they had several patients die, and it became a New York Times front page article. And so, so the market was the whole market was sensitized to this. And so I knew if I did this recall at this point in time, it would be a major news story. But I didn't let anything get in the way of what I thought and what we all thought was the best thing for patients, notwithstanding the fact that our business would probably be severely impacted and stock price would probably just crash because of the uncertainty about what would happen. But nonetheless, I went to the board of the directors and I said, I made the decision, we're going to do a recall. And it was, sure enough, and we had an analyst call that next Monday morning, told the street and everybody that we were doing this recall. Stock price, we went from 57 to like $39. A lot of pressure, on did we make the right decision. And here I am 10 years later, and I will tell you that customers today still applaud what we did and the way that we handled that. And in retrospect, it was absolutely the right thing to do.
You saw a similar situation at Wyeth, right, with FenFen?
Yeah, I've been in a couple situations. I was at Eli Lilly in 1982 when they had a osteoarthritic drug called Oraflex. I was at J&J. Well, I wasn't there when they had the. I had it when they had the issues with the screw top, where the safety of the caps, and then I was at American Home Products Wyeth when they had the problem with the FenFen diet pill drug. So, but I've seen on the other cases. I've been unfortunately aware of other situations when companies did not make that decision. Like one of our competitors who tried not to try to let things just kind of maybe play itself out, and then patients die, and then it becomes a real bad situation.
So what's the back of the matchbook lesson on that?
The lesson is that, at the end of the day, you've got to do what you think is the right thing for the right reason. And ultimately, and I've always put patients first. I've always put, the concern for, the people whose lives depend on what we do. And I've always, worked hard at, garnering the trust, of the people that I work with, our customers, our physician collaborators. And so the moral is, never compromise the trust.
Any sort of quick lessons that you learned during the global meltdown of the economy?
The global meltdown of the economy is that, that was an interesting one, because if you'd looked at the healthcare industry up until that time, the healthcare industry in general had sort of been a very defensive stock, a defensive area. And I can't remember a time in my whole career when the economic sort of cycles impacted the outlook, on sort of the life sciences. I mean, it's rare that people would opt out of having a procedure done for fear that because they couldn't pay for it. And so I think the lesson there was that ultimately you got to keep your eye on the long run. You can't. I mean, just because we were in a very fortunate position at Medtronic. We were generating a lot of cash, and it would have been very easy for us at that point in time to just say, we're not going to invest. We're just going to be very conservative. And in fact, it was actually an opportunity because we had enough cash, even though our stock price was hit like everybody else's, we could afford to do deals. And in the 4 years that I was at Medtronic, I did over 25 deals and ended up buying some really, really exciting platform technology, which has fueled Medtronic in the last 5 years. Things like the transcatheter valves and things like our new cryocath, which is for radiofrequency ablation of atrial fibrillation. So anyway, you gotta keep your eye on the long run.
Yeah. Same go for the device tax lesson?
The device tax lesson. I mean, I was on the forefront of that whole negotiation during the Affordability Care Act, and sadly, it really soured me on Washington in terms of just the way that decisions are made there. And again, to some degree, I mean, you do everything you think is the right thing to do to really try to educate people on the value of our industry, and yet some of the decisions get made and as a consequence of trying to serve other purposes. And so I don't think I got any lessons out of that one.
So there's a tradition at Medtronic that actually you told me about among the men who occupy the corner office, and it involves exchanging of these symbolic gifts. You got a sword from your...
That's right. I'm still trying to figure that one out.
And you gave your successor a globe. I'm wondering, though, did you get any actual advice from your predecessor about putting your own stamp on the company? And when you're taking over a company like that, how difficult is it to make it your own?
Yeah, I mean, he gave me the sword with the advice of this is what you use to fight the competition and to cut through the red tape, which I thought was, in some respects, I think, good advice. It wasn't really advice, but one of the privileges of working at Medtronic, was the fact that this company, which was founded by Earl Bakken in 1949, he was the guy that started or developed the first pacemaker, which he did in 1957. And for some of you who are kind of in your early stage startups, I mean, don't lose faith, because in 1957, Earl Bakken, who had developed this little battery-operated temporary pacemaker, was running out of money. And so he went to his board in 1960 and trying to raise money to fund the development of an implantable pacemaker. And the board essentially, and really I say board, it was really kind of like angel investors. And the board said, look, I mean, we'll lend you the money, or we'll put money into the company on one condition, and that is that you clearly articulate a mission for this enterprise. And so Earl wrote a mission in 1960. And this mission was about alleviating pain, restoring health, and extending life. And, he talked about in that mission, the respect for the individual. He talked about the focus on the patient. He talked about quality. And so, the advice that my predecessor gave me was really very simple. I mean, it was really, to honor the mission and everything that we did. And, we used to do these mission medallion ceremonies. It's one of the better parts of my job, one of the privileges of my job, that, we would go around the world and we would hold a ceremony and we would talk about, the founding of Medtronic and talk about when Earl wrote this mission and really what it meant, as kind of the guiding principles of the company. And, and that, I believe, is still why Medtronic is, in my judgment, one of the best companies in any industry because of its solid foundation, of its strong mission.
So do you feel like you put your stamp on the company?
Absolutely. I mean, I've always been one who has believed that, innovation is the lifeblood of what we do. And, as I said, when I came into the company, we had basically acquired a lot of technologies. And I think to some degree maybe took a little of our eyes off the importance of really kindling that spirit within the enterprise. And I've often heard people talk about the fact that large companies can't innovate. And, I was the first, by the way, engineer, other than Earl Bakken, who was the founder of the company, to be a CEO of the company. And I strongly, strongly believe, that at the end of the day, I mean, innovation is what is going to drive the success of this enterprise. And while we had acquired it in the late 90s and the early 2000s, I felt a responsibility to really kind of refocus the enterprise and give them that sort of inspiration and encouragement that we could innovate internally. I see Bryant Moore, who's one of my Medtronic colleagues, and he was in the advanced development group. And so I spent a lot of time really encouraging people to kind of think out of the box. But you have to realize that even though, I think large companies can innovate, you also have to keep your eyes open for things that are happening outside. And so I think the art is getting that balance right of internal and external. And if I look sort of at when I left Medtronic and what's happened since then, we've had remarkable success in the pipeline that we put in place. Half of it was internal and half of it was external. The MRI safe, so we developed when I was there, we improved our pacemakers and our defibrillators. We made them so that they were MRI compatible. In the past, if you had a pacemaker, you couldn't have an MRI because the MRI would heat up the pacemaker. So we internally developed these MRI-safe technologies. We developed a new diagnostic, an implantable diagnostic, which I believe is really the future of not just devices that treat, but of things you can do to better diagnose to ensure that you are then providing the best therapy. So we developed an implantable sensor, which is the size of a matchstick, that is, in its first year, became almost a $500 million business. And then we did a number of really important acquisitions, one of which was the transcatheter valve, the core valve. We acquired a company called CryoLife, or CryoCath, that makes an atrial fibrillation catheter system. And we acquired a number of companies in the spine area. And so if I look at what's happened since I left, I've always said the mark of a good leader, it's not so much what the company looks like when you're there, but what does the company look like 2 years or 3 years post your term? Because if you built the company where it's so dependent on you, and if you leave and the company falls apart, then you're not a good leader. But if you put the things in motion such that when you leave, that the company has that momentum, that inertia, I think that's a real sign of a good leader.
Well, they're doing great, so you were Really good leader then.
Yeah.
So I remember I saw you, maybe 3 or 4 months after you left Medtronic, and I gotta say that before and after was stunning because you looked so relaxed. Like you were tan. You were like, you told me you just got off the golf course. You're the most relaxed guy, and you still are. Not to imply that you've gone back to that stress period, but I mean, you looked really content and really happy and really like you'd done what you needed to do. But now you're the busiest retired guy I've ever met. I mean, why did you jump right back in the game? Why did you go to Immucor?
Well, as I said, Pat made the comment about, you have to love what you do, and I absolutely love what I do. I mean, to me, there's nothing more sort of exciting, there's nothing more challenging, there's nothing more rewarding than sort of being on the front line. And I took some time off before I jumped back into it, but I had, kind of done most everything. I mean, even before I joined Medtronic, I was in Atlanta and I did a venture-backed startup, which we took public, and it was very successful. So I, run a small venture-backed company. I had the privilege of running, large divisions of other big companies, and I had the privilege of running Medtronic. And I have to say, I became a little soured when I was running Medtronic, at the dynamics of being a large public enterprise. And to some degree, I think the public model is, I'm not going to go so far to say it's completely broken, but it's fractured. There's so many sort of voices that are pushing you in so many directions. Sadly, as a public company, the shareholder sort of activism today is really, I think, working its way into the boardrooms, and CEOs in some cases are, they're running the company for the wrong constituents. And so I was always interested in the private equity model. And so when I was leaving Medtronic, I knew that I wanted to do something in private equity. Quite honestly, I wasn't necessarily looking to go back and run another company, but I wanted to have the experience of having the resources, even almost like a Medtronic, but to be able to really find ways of funding innovation in a more of a private way. And so I ended up going to work with one of the largest private equity groups, TPG, out in San Francisco. We have about $50 billion under management. And they ended up buying a company in sort of this region. It was actually in Atlanta. And everything looked pretty interesting, pretty exciting about it. And it was a big transaction. It was about a $2.5 billion deal for them. And so I said, look, I'll come down and sort of get it started. Well, 3.5 years later, it's started, but it didn't finish.
Right.
So, but I had a blast. It was a different area. It was in the world of diagnostics. I'm really excited about. I think that we're in an era now that we can do things with technology that enable us to, I think, do a much better job in really understanding what the underlying disease issues are, so that we can then titrate therapy in a more effective way. So, it was a combination of things that kind of got me excited. And but I didn't just do that. I went on several boards, and I also, as you know, Brian, I devoted a good percentage of my time to doing God's work in Washington.
Yeah.
With the FDA.
MDIC, right?
Yeah.
Medical Device Consortium. So it was more fun at Immucor, perhaps, than Medtronic, or was it?
No, I would say so. I loved it, Medtronic. I'm not going to make any bones about it. It was, one of the greatest experiences you could ever imagine. I mean, it was a tough period. I mean, there's no question about it, and it was highly, highly stressful. Yeah. And I have a few witnesses. You know, I'm very blessed tonight to have 2 of my 3 children in the back. My daughters, Elizabeth and Julia, who were in Minneapolis during that experience, and they can attest, you know, that it was tough. And in fact, my daughter Elizabeth, I never will forget, she said to me once, "Daddy, you don't know me." But
you drove around the block a few times?
No, but
no, I would think maybe you wore off the treads on those tires around the block before you went home, so you didn't take it home. There's a bit of a pattern, though, I see in your career. You know, you leave Wyatt, you actually had to sell the division you were in charge of, right?
Right.
And then you joined a startup. And then, you know, you look at sort of the bookend experiences, CEO of a major company, then you go back and kind of jump into this private venture. What would you say is your favorite experience if you kind of look back at all those different places?
Golly, that's a tough one. What's my favorite experience? You know, I have to say, I really enjoyed the startup. I did the startup late in my sort of career. I had joined Eli Lilly and /Guidon. I spent 13 years there. And then I went to Johnson & Johnson. And then I went to American Home Products. And then when I was at American Home, we had the problem with FinFin. At that point, we had 3 big companies, which I was the corporate vice president in charge of, and one was called Sherwood Davis & Geck, a company called Quinton Instruments, and another company called Stores. And so the CEO at that point, when FinFin hit, said, "Bill, I know I just hired you 6 months ago to run this whole group, but unfortunately, I think we're going to have a little bit of a legal liability going forward, so we're going to need to sell your division." And he therefore said, "I want you to basically work with investment bankers, and we're going to sell these 3 companies." And it was kind of an interesting, because the largest was Sherwood Davis & Geck, and as soon as we announced that we were looking for strategic buyers, I got a call from a guy in New Hampshire. That would be Dennis Kozlowski, and that would be Tyco. And at that point, you know, they were just sort of on a tear, and he said, "We'll pay you whatever you want in cash." And so, anyway, that was a short-lived deal. That was pretty good. And then we sold the other 2 companies. But anyway, so then after that, I was literally, I mean, I think I was, had been in large companies, and then I didn't know what I was going to do after American Home Products. And that's when a friend of mine who was in Atlanta had started this company in the interventional cardiology space, and he asked me if I would consider coming down to see if I would work with them to run this company called Novost. And it was having been in large companies, and there's a lot of sort of inertia, and you always wonder if what you do really makes a difference. And so I was kind of intrigued by the idea of going to a small company where, I mean, whatever happens is because you made it happen. And Pat, I think, is a good example of that. And so I went down to Atlanta, and I mean, I was involved in everything. And it was a lot of fun to take a concept and to be able to get it through the FDA. And then in our first year, we did almost $75 million in sales, which is unheard of. Wow. But the most rewarding thing was our number 1 competitor in that space was Johnson & Johnson, who I despised. And so, you know, I've spent my career going after J&J, and I have to say, I'm not bragging, but I'm 3-0. So.
I think you might try for 4-0.
No.
No.
Well, you never know. I mean, I'm always looking for that next one. So.
All right. So we're going to try a little bit. I want you to try to answer this, you know, without too much thought. But you made a lot of deals, and I want to know which ones. Is there one that really holds a special spot for you what's one that you really hold up with pride, and what's the one that you sort of say, kind of wish I had that one back?
Well, I can start with the one I wish I had back, which was when I was president of Medtronic, not yet the CEO. We acquired a company called Kyphon, which was basically it's a kyphoplasty business, and it was a company that had acquired a company, and we were really interested in the company that they acquired, and I learned a big lesson and they were a public company, and I learned a lesson that you really need to do a lot of due diligence when you do a big deal, and we didn't have the opportunity to really do much due diligence, particularly on the company that we were really interested in, because they were now buried in the public company, and it was a disaster.
Well, at least they never beat you over the head with that.
Oh, yeah, they never. My board reminded me about that every single solitary board meeting for 4 years. They wanted to hear about Kyphon.
Oh my.
Yeah.
Now how about let's go to the good one.
Yeah, let's talk about the
It doesn't have to be the
good
best. It can just be one that you like.
That's a hard question. I mean, I have to tell you, one of my best friend is here, Kim Westmoreland, who I chair his company, a company called Carinetics. And so I've done a lot of different things in my career, and this is what I love about what I do, because there's always something else that you find that you never thought you would be doing. And about a year ago, there's a company in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, called Tengion. Some of you may have known it. It's a regenerative medicine company. In fact, I first came across Tengion when I was at Medtronic, when I was a CEO. We put $20 million into a program that they had for chronic kidney disease, which is really kind of fascinating for patients who are late-stage kidney failure. They essentially had developed a technique for biopsying that patient's kidney, essentially taking that biopsy and isolating certain progenitor cells, and then putting them into a bioreactor, and then putting them back into the patient. And anyway, fast forward, I had left Medtronic. The company was doing another program in tandem with that, and at the end of the day, it was not well managed, and they ran out of money, and they ultimately went bankrupt. But this program for the chronic kidney disease they had just completed their phase 1 clinical study, and even though we didn't have the results, everything looked like it was going to be really good. And so Kim came to me and said, look, because he lives in Winston, this company's just gone bankrupt. And I said, well, I know him very well. And so anyway, we put together a group of North Carolina investors, and we bought the company out of bankruptcy, and with the intent of raising $25 million to do the phase 2 clinical study. And, we bought the company, and then we were able to then harvest the phase 1 data, and the phase 1 data was just off the charts good. I mean, this looked like it could be a dramatic therapy for patients with chronic kidney disease. And so we thought we could go out and just raise $25 million. Well, I spent a lot of last year working to try to raise $25 million. And here it was. Here's the company, by the way. Tengion there was $400 million of capital in this company, all sort of put into a lot of basic research. And they had built a $15 million Class 1 manufacturing operation. So we bought all of this for like $1.5 million. But with the idea of spending $25 million to do the phase 2 study. But we had to then fund the operation while we were trying to find the investors. So it wasn't just $1.5 million, it turned out to be about $4 or $5 million. And I was shocked at how hard it was to get capital. In fact, we didn't get capital. And at the end of last year, we were like, I had to go to the investors one more time to just try to keep this thing on life support. And lo and behold, one of the groups that we were looking to lead the financing came out of the woodwork and said, we don't want to lead it, we want to buy it. And at 6:15 tonight, we closed the deal.
Oh, you old dog.
That's a true story. So, Kim, we're going to have a glass of champagne after this, I can tell you that.
All right, you're buying, right? That's awesome.
And the good news is this trial is going to get done, which is the most important thing.
Oh, that's great.
I mean, that's the most important thing.
Okay, we're running really, we're probably a little bit behind time, so I just want to be really concise on this. You're at the point in your career where you need to begin thinking about the next generation of med tech innovators like you. You know, you look at your 25 years in the corner office, and you know, 2 pieces of advice you give the next generation of CEOs to remember.
2 pieces of advice.
Yeah, and they gotta be like, you know, don't take wooden nickels and.
Well, first, I think the most important thing, you know, and it's not just for a CEO, but it's for people in a leadership role. It's, you know, people often ask me about how I've gotten to where I've gotten to, and I think a big part of my success has been that, you know, I have always sort of maintained a good balance of kind of EQ and IQ, of humility and confidence. And I just really, my advice to people, I don't care how smart you are, I mean, really just maintain a sense of humility and be a bit humble. So that's one. And then I think the other is you got to find something that really excites you. I mean, I've been so blessed in my career. I mean, I still do what I do, and probably, as you said, I'm as busy today as I've ever been because I just absolutely love, you know, the working with people and working on things that are going to change people's lives. So you find that right combination of something that you're excited about, and then kind of surround yourself with people that you want to be with, and don't lose that sense of humility.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah,
Let's
thank
give a
you.
round of applause. That was awesome.